Mark, so good to see you. Where are you today, my friend?
I am here in my son's room, actually, in San Carlos. He's off at college, so I've taken over his room as my work from home office.
Oh, I love that. That's great. San Carlos. That's a cool spot. Sort of
Yes.
is it sort of like is that East Bay?
No, it's Mid
No.
Peninsula. We're
Yes,
just north of
Martha.
Redwood
Yeah.
City and Palo
Yeah.
Alto. Um, it's called the City of Good Living, and it certainly is. We've been here for almost 20 years now, so certainly enjoy it here.
And you guys have a little airport there too, right?
We do, and
Yeah.
a great omelet restaurant right there at that airport.
Sweet. Yeah, I've flown in from Surf Air on
Oh
occasion
yeah,
to that
perfect.
airport,
Yeah.
so I should have known better that it was Mid Peninsula. I flew in from Santa Barbara. That's a really nice flight.
Oh yeah, that would be on Surf Air too. Right
Yeah.
on.
Um, well, I'm so excited. We're new friends. We haven't known each other that long, but you're one of these people that you just like met you, hung out, and was like, I want to be buds with this guy.
I felt the same way, Kurt. I mean, it was we kind of had that brief little connection there with the music, and I think that was, really kind of when it started. But again, meeting at the surf ranch and in that environment, it was certainly a great way to be able to connect with people.
Yeah, yeah, we're gonna dig into that for sure. I'm pretty excited. Timmy Curran invited me to go back again, and we're gonna go hit it on Saturday. So
Oh, right
yeah,
on. Well, I was just talking to Brian and TK, and we are making our date for our, the annual number 2 for making
great.
waves. So,
Well, we got a little text thread with Jack Johnson and Timmy Curran and trying to align that date with Jack's tour. So
that would be
um,
fun. That would be
that'd be
fun.
sweet if JJ could jump in with us. Yeah,
Yeah, that'd be
sweet. Um, well, just so much to cover. I really want to dig into what you're doing at work because it's really timely with everything that's happening in the on the macro trend. But I'm excited because I'm going to learn a bunch about you on this show today. So why don't before we get into sort of what's the here and now, let's press rewind a little bit.
sure.
You have where'd you grow up, Mark?
I grew up in a number of places. My dad was a climbing the corporate ladder, and I was born in New Jersey, moved to Massachusetts, moved back to New Jersey, moved to Ohio, and then ended up in Concord, Massachusetts in fifth grade. That all happened before fifth grade. And we ended up, I ended up growing up really in Concord, Massachusetts, is how I look at it.
How far is that from Boston?
That's about 23 miles out from Boston.
Yeah.
Those of you who know your American history will know that at Concord was the rude bridge that arched the flood, and the shot heard round the world was fired there. And flash forward another 100 years or so, and we have Henry David Thoreau and Walden and Emerson and Hawthorne and Louisa May Alcott and the whole transcendentalist movement coming out of Concord. So seeped in history. I grew up around.
Oh, that's one of the things I'm loving exploring on the show is where people are from and sort of the history and the artifacts that emerge from these different places. Yeah, that's amazing. That's rich.
Yeah, really is. And
So you go.
I was going to say, and I ended up being an English teacher, and I think growing up in Concord and being around all that, and my dad being a fan of it too, was one of those things that really kind of influenced what I was interested in school.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great segue. So you studied English at Wesleyan, which is a
Yep,
great school.
a lot of
How
fun.
was that experience?
That experience was amazing. I mean, I came to Wesleyan kind of as a pretty narrow-minded, preppy jock from Concord, Massachusetts, and I was quickly introduced to a more diverse group of people than I had ever been, part of. And Wesleyan really forced me to open my eyes. And the school was very adamant about people being able to have their voice heard, and that meant that other people had to shut up and listen. And I think that was really kind of the first time in my life that I learned, how to listen and not, just want to say, but also want to hear as well.
Yeah, I love that. Part of my story is I was born without ear canals. And so I had 35 to 40% hearing loss. It's like kind of like living your life with earplugs in persistently. So I could get by, but I had to, like, in class, I had to sit in the front row. If you were farther than 6 feet away from me, I could tell you were talking to me, but I would have to read lips, and it was pretty challenging. And when I had this incredible miracle happened in 2007 in my early 30s, where I got the miracle of hearing with this cochlear implant here, and
Wow.
kind of show it to you. This thing just
Yeah,
snaps into
yeah.
my skull, and I can hear magically. And the big insight that I got from that relates to what you're talking about is um, essentially that all those years I just really wanted to hear, but when I got my hearing, it just really gave me the space to really enjoy and absorb listening.
That's a beautiful distinction. And, hearing and listening are slightly different activities, I think. Hearing, really is, I mean, tends to be more about the sounds, I guess, whereas listening really engages the mind as well. I mean, that's maybe how I might look at it. I always used to say the acronym, 2 ears and one mouth. God was telling us something about the importance of listening versus speaking, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the phrase is use accordingly, right?
Exactly.
Well, that'll be a great kind of foreshadowing, to use a riff a little bit on my English
There you
skills,
go. There you go.
on what we're going to get into later with soul centered selling, which I'm excited to dig into. And I really do think, as sort of business professionals, that actively listening is really is key. I struggle with it. Doing the podcast has really helped me to be a better listener, because I go
Mm,
back and have to listen through the conversations, and there'll be whole sections where I'm like, oh my gosh, I was totally checked out. So
yeah. Yeah. No, it's what's amazing about listening is so many of us are listening to respond as opposed to listening to understand, right? And when you're listening to respond, you're thinking of what it is that you want to say in response to whatever it is you're hearing, as opposed to listening to understand, where you're ignoring. If you can't shut down that internal voice, at least you're ignoring it, and you're focusing really on what that person is saying. And asking good follow-up questions is always a great way to start to integrate that into the mind, as we're talking about.
yeah, yeah, and then be able to take a step back and notice the emotional signal that we're getting and what information that's telling us.
Hmm.
Um, what we're kind of digging in on learning. What was one of the insights that you learned at school, Mark, that has really stuck with you and was sort of foundational for your success in life and your career?
um you got to do the work. You got to do the work. And I got through high school academically pretty much with my wits and my charm. And I was a talented athlete as well, and that helped me get into school. But when I got to Wesleyan, it meant nothing. and I thought I could kind of do the same thing. And I could kind of waltz around, and when a couple weeks left in the semester, I'll start working, and I'll be fine. And anybody who's gone through any sort of rigorous academic stuff knows that that doesn't happen. And I totally overestimated the amount of work that I was going to have to do. And I'll never forget going to a one-on-one with my English teacher. I was taking an English writing course, college writing course, and Professor Coley was his name. And I showed up one late October evening at his office hours, and I sat down, and I thought we were going to go over my paper. And he looked at me and he said, "Mark, what the F are you doing here?" And my jaw just dropped. I was like, what? He goes, "What are you doing here? You're wasting my time. You're wasting your time." And he just cut into me and called me to account in a way that a teacher had never called me to account. And it shattered me. I mean, it shook me, and I fumbled through, and I ended up, getting a point 0.5 GPA my first semester at Wesleyan. But he had turned something on, and I realized that, hey, I had an opportunity here. And then when my dad saw those grades a little bit later, he certainly lit a fire under my toes as well. And I learned that I had to work, and I said, okay, well, I guess I'm here. I got to work. So instead of, partying 4 or 5 nights of the week, I started working 3, 4, 5 nights of the week. And I actually went to the library and I started doing stuff, and I went to see teachers and I learned stuff. And I ended up getting a 3.2 GPA my second semester. And when I showed up at school for the fall of my sophomore year, there was a letter in my mailbox from the dean of students, and I was like, "Oh no, what now?" You know.
Yeah.
And I opened it up, and it said, "Congratulations, you've been awarded the Bruner Freshman Improvement Prize for the greatest academic achievement, but you know, improvement between first and second semesters. And here's your check for $150 and a invitation to the president's house for the cocktail party." So it turned out to be a great thing. I got to pay off my phone bills and help the fraternity with its social calendar as well with some of that money. But the bottom line, I really learned how to sit down and work in college.
Yeah, that's great. I love that story. How thoughtful of the school to do that too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Those are the little things, right? What was that teacher that you mentioned? Was that your favorite teacher, or was there somebody else that was
Well,
better?
he was certainly the most, one of the most influentials, and he was a crusty old kind of, New England poet. He had the pipes and the
Mhm.
patches on the
Yeah.
elbows and everything. I mean, he was like a classic, and he was a great guy. But I also had another teacher named Marjorie Rosenbaum, and she was the one who kind of influenced me to become a teacher when I was at Wesleyan. And I graduated from college a long time ago in 1985, and we were in the midst of Wolf on Wall Street, the excess of the 80s, and all my friends were going to go to New York City and be investment bankers, right? And I was going through something that was kind of tough my senior year. My father had been diagnosed before the school year with brain cancer, and he was dying during the course of the year and ended up passing away, um, you know, in May before my graduation. But so I was obviously going through a lot, that I really didn't understand at the time. But I had no motivation to go do interviews with Morgan Stanley or all the other big banks like everybody was telling me I should do. And I was telling my teacher about this, and she said, "You're pretty good in this class teaching of English. You should be a teacher." And so she hooked me up with a couple people, and that's how I ended up, right after school, going down to Washington D.C. and becoming a English teacher at the Landon School for Boys in Bethesda, Maryland.
And how long did you do that for?
I was there for 4 years. I was there for
Mhm.
4 years, and
Yeah.
I was teaching middle schoolers. I was like 22, 23, and they were like 14, 15. I mean, we're like peers now. They seemed really young back then.
Yeah, that's great. What were your favorite books to teach?
To Kill a Mockingbird was number
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, why that book?
Because it's just such a powerful story, man. I mean,
Mhm.
it's told from the point of view of Scout, and it's this child's point of view, and there's this loss of innocence that comes through it, but there's also such perseverance in the characters, and in Atticus Finch, and Tom Robinson, and it I think it was such a great opportunity to be open up because I taught it to eighth graders, and it was a great way of opening up conversations about, about race, about treating people equally, about, the wrongs of the past, about personal accountability. I mean, it's just it's so beautifully written as well, and it's such an easy read, even for like eighth grade kids. They love reading it.
Yeah, fun. Yeah, I remember it's been a long time since I've read it, and all those character names and the plot lines kind of coming back to me. So
Yeah.
that's really cool.
It also, I think, has the best movie adaptation of any book I ever taught. So, the whole Gregory Peck, black and white movie from the mid '60s is a great adaptation of it that sticks pretty close to the story. And there's nothing better to motivate eighth graders, particularly back in the '80s, to say, "Hey, once we finish the book, we're going to watch a movie." Like, oh yeah, all right, we're watching a movie.
Love that. So, what was the transition from teaching into the business world? Kind of
Yeah, well,
oh,
yeah, I mean, I've always been kind of as I told you, I moved around a lot as a kid, and I kind of just got used to moving. And after a few years in DC, I was looking for something different, and I was in a relationship at the time, and the woman was moving to California to go to law school. So I said, "What the heck? I think I'll move to California." And quite honestly, I'd always wanted to move to California. When I was a little kid, I used to watch the Brady Bunch, and I'd see, it'd be cold and windy and snow in Massachusetts, and I'd look at the Brady Bunch and I'd see, Marcia and AstroTurfs, and I like California, man. That looks like the place to be, to quote another old TV show. But
yeah.
so I had always kind of wanted to go, and this was my opportunity. And when I got out here, I didn't really know anybody, and my girlfriend at the time was off doing law school, and she was very busy, and I was looking for some sort of opportunity. I found a job selling golf clubs at a place called Don Sherwood's Golf and Tennis in San Francisco, where I experienced the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake. But I found a job through a group of people. I'm a lacrosse player, so I got hooked up with a lacrosse team, and I ended up getting a job in sales. And it seemed like it was a good job for me, as I was a communicator, but sales was a lot harder than I thought it would be when I
Mm.
first got into it, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, definitely art and science to it, no doubt. What a wild time a fun time to be in San Francisco. And what was that, like late 80s, early 90s?
Yeah, late '80s, early '90s, and
Wow, that sounds like a good time.
that was crazy. Silicon Valley was a manufacturing hub back then. They were making disk drives here. They were making, mice here, Logitech, Quantum.
Mhm.
They were making touch screens here. I mean, like, it was quite a manufacturing hub, and that changed pretty quickly, but that's what it
Yeah,
was back then.
yeah. Well, I think a lot of that stuff's coming back. Whether I don't think come back to Silicon Valley, it's probably not the best use of land, but yeah, that's some of the stuff I want to dig into what you're doing at the bank now. But well, fast forward. So I'm looking at your LinkedIn. You have a lot of interesting stuff. The thing that jumps out at me in the context of what I do in my day to day at Hunt Club within the talent market is you had a long stint at TriNet,
Mm,
which has an incredible reputation in the tech sector as being, at least in the startup space, like here in LA, TriNet has done an incredible job building out a real trusted brand of if you need to get your payroll set up or insurance and all that kind of stuff, it's sort of a one-stop shop. How did you get? How was your time there, and what did you really like about that space?
yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it was a great run there. I was there for about 6 years, and when I joined TriNet, it was still really a small company. I mean, it was still it's nothing like what you see today. I mean, it was a small company where a lot of the people had been there for 10 plus years and they'd done things a certain way. They had got to a certain growth point. But I joined right about the time where the CEO and the board decided that this was a company that was going to get on the IPO track, and so I was involved with the sales team at the time, and when I joined TriNet, I called it, it was relationship roulette. It was like the wild, wild west, right? Like I'd say, hey, there's this guy, Kurt, that I know at the hunt club. I want to call on him. And somebody else would say, well, I was calling the hunt club, but I was calling to the HR person. I was like, well, Kurt's above the HR person, so I should get to deal with Kurt, right? And that's kind of how we played it, right? And I knew a lot of people, so that was an effective you know, I was good in that game.
Yeah, you weaponize or monetize your network in a great way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, but that's not a scalable way of doing things, particularly when you get on that IPO track. So,
Sure.
they brought in a sales head sales guy named John Turner, JT, who became a great mentor and somebody I learned a lot from, about leadership and about really kind of driving change and evolution in the sales group. And we went from this kind of wild wild west gunslingers, everybody out there working on their own, to a group that was 20 times bigger than when I first started a sales team, that had process, that had verticals. And, I got to be a good part of leading the charge to do that by running a team here in the Bay Area. So it's, TriNet was a great run. And, those of us who were there back then, we're not quite the PayPal mafia, but, we have a good bunch of relationships, and we still run across each other and we still do business with each other.
How many people were there when you started roughly in '09 when you got there? Remember?
Yeah, there's probably 600-700 people there.
Yeah. Any idea what the head count is now?
I mean, it's probably 10K somewhere ish, I would guess.
Yeah. Then did they go public?
Yeah, they went public. Yep. And
Yeah.
I was there for the party. I didn't get to go to New York, but our headquarters were in San Leandro, and we had a nice little cutout thing where you got to stick your face through and get your picture taken with the CEO on the on the IPO. We all got little bells, man. I still got my bell, so it was
How
fun.
fun.
It was fun.
That's great. Well, I think that's a great segue. I'm also looking at your career. You did some executive coaching, which I think is really near and dear to my heart, for a bunch of reasons. Talk to me about your coaching background.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think my desire to be a coach, an executive coach, came from the impact that it had on me, and being coached by a couple great coaches. And I was like, wow, this is an amazing thing. This is something I want to pass on to other people. And I've you know when you talk about kind of transformations and things, and sometimes there's big ones, sometimes there's little ones, sometimes it takes 2 seconds, sometimes it takes 20 years, right? um but my I was a very angry young man. When I was in middle school, my parents split up. My mother came out as a lesbian, and this was 1975 in Concord, Massachusetts. Things were a little bit different then. So my parents split up, and I didn't really understand it. And the men in my family had passed on anger as the emotion on how we deal with things. And my father had a temper, and I had a temper, and this incident that happened to me really fueled that. And you know for a while it was actually a very valuable thing. I mean, I became a very good football player and lacrosse player, to violent games where I was able to go out and hit people and do, you know, things that on the street would have got me put away. But I was able to express that and through that, and it became something that worked for me for a while. But as I got older, and particularly when I became a father, I started seeing how anger was really limiting me from fulfilling my potential in the business world on the one hand, but really from being the father that I wanted to be on the other hand. And so I sought out coaching. I wanted to deal with this, and I wanted to find out where it came from and why I was doing this. And I wanted to break this cycle that had gone down, in the generations, because my grandfather was yelling at my dad, and I'm sure his dad was yelling at him. And so I was transformed through the coaching process. I worked through with two different coaches over the course of a few years, and I really got to understand, where that anger came from, and you know all the different emotions that it was masking, and how to experience those, and most importantly, how to not yell at my boys because they were 4 years old and doing things that 4-year-olds do. um,
Sure.
but just being able to breathe, hear that come on, and just like, okay, I'll let you make a mess. I mean, and it's not a huge thing in a sense. I mean, in a sense it is, but it's expressed in these little things that come out, right? And so, having gone through that process, I wanted to help other people, transform whatever they needed to do. And so went through, got some coaching classes under my belt, and went out and started working with people. And, my niche was, working with founders that tended to be more kind of technical type of founders who were having a hard time selling per se, right? And kind of how you need to work through some insecurities and gain some confidence on your side to be able to go out and really effectively tell the story, and do the kinds of sales activities. And when I say sales, I mean raising money, I mean getting customers, and also hiring people that you need to do as a founder. So that was the impetus behind it, and that was how I ultimately expressed it, was in working with those folks.
Yeah, it seems like a practical expression and evolution, like hearing even the lacrosse story about how you were able to channel that anger into something that was productive, that actually was sort of, not antisocial, right? It's like an acceptable way to get the lead out, if you will. And I appreciate that. And it sounds like I mean, look, being a sales director of sales at TriNet on an IPO train, and then being able to transition that out to, running your own sales and or your own coaching practice for looks like almost 4 years. That's pretty cool. Kind of use that same lacrosse insight. It seems like that's part of your pattern. How do you make create leverage, right? Or I don't know if that's even the right word, but maybe something around productivity or
Yeah, I mean, it's a constant kind of. I mean, it's a willingness to learn, and it's a willingness to, have that beginner's mind. And I've reinvented myself a number of times, right? And that's the word that I use, but I think it's more, these are the evolutions that I'm going through, right? And you know, being being willing to try something new, to dive into the bank, after I've been, not a banker for my entire career, and to dive in there, right? I mean, that was something that was a whole different world that I had seen from the outside, certainly, in working with the bank before, but never from the inside.
Well, I think that's a great segue. So you're now the senior vice president of technology banking at Pacific Western Bank. You've been there over 2 years. Looks like you got uh, I don't know if a promotion is the right word, but you went from being the VC startup guy to looks like you have a wider mandate now. It makes sense if you had a great network at TriNet with founders, you were coaching them, that you have this network that was interesting to the bank. For listeners, PacWest acquired Square One. Is that right? A few years back.
Correct, correct.
Yeah.
So, Square One was a bank that was founded by some ex Silicon Valley bankers in Durham, California. I mean, Durham, North Carolina, excuse me. I think in the mid 2000s there. One of the funny, interesting things is that Square One and TriNet went public on the same day. How about that? Um, so the bank ended up buying Square One in 2015, I think it was. And so we now operate as the venture banking group within Pacific Western Bank, which is a $40 billion bank with business units centered around community banking, asset based lending, real estate finance for rehabs, and HOAs, actually, beyond what we do here in the venture bank.
So walk us through, like, there's actually a Pacific West Bank branch here close to me. Yeah, that all makes sense. I think the Square One thing is interesting because they had such a great brand in the market. They sort of punched above their weight class, competing with
Mm-hmm.
Silicon Valley Bank, which is sort of the 800-pound gorilla in the sort of tech.
I think they're up to 900 pounds now.
Yeah, 900 pounds now. Yeah. So, I think that's interesting that sort of like more conservative brand acquired sort of this hot upstart bank. A lot of brand equity there for Square One, so that's super cool for you guys to tap into that. I'm curious. So the core offering that you are delivering is essentially venture debt, which is an
Yep,
alternative to equity financing. I'd love to learn about like what the ideal clients look like
sure.
who, like what's tall enough to ride, and then
Yeah,
what is the core product? What are the terms and the process? Where does it work well, and where does it break down?
yeah, definitely, definitely. And I wouldn't say that venture debt is in place of equity. It's typically raised on top of the equity, right? So, I mean,
Fair.
it certainly adds to the balance sheet without diluting anymore, right? So, venture debt's a product that most companies that are raising, significant equity rounds from institutional investors are at least taking a look at these days, right? Venture debt for us works best with a company that has raised fresh equity from investors that we are familiar with. There's a founding team in there that we can, you know, look at and say, these are very talented people in their field. They know something extra. They've been through it before. What are the characteristics of that team? Obviously, what's the market opportunity? But revenue is something we look at too as an early stage, right? Because some of what we'll lend against is that recurring revenue in the case of SaaS businesses, right? But typically where we're going to land, and the technology is important too, but we don't we don't think of ourselves as tech experts, and that's one of the reasons that we lean on the VCs, because we figured they're doing much more tech diligence than we would do as a bank. Our diligence is mostly focused around the financial side of things. But we'll typically lend anywhere from 25 to 40-ish% of the dollars that were raised. So if raise 30 million in a B round, we might give you a bid for a $10 million line. That might some of that might be available to you right away. Some of it you might have to hit some milestones to hit. But what we're doing now is a combination of that formula revolver and term loans and putting those together to get to the total amount that we'll get there. But we do checks from as small as a couple million up to about 70 million or so that we can write on our own, and then if it's bigger than that, we tend to syndicate as well. So we compete against that 900-pound gorilla that we talked about before, and some other players in the space, including some private debt funds. But what really, we're focused on is creating opportunity or creating solutions for our clients that fit their particular business needs. And as we look at the landscape, we know there's no business that's exactly like any other business. So we pride ourselves on the ability to be flexible enough to really kind of work around what the business needs and be working almost in collaboration with them as we put together what we're going to propose as a debt facility.
Got it. And is the debt facility, is that sort of the kind of the broader offering where you mentioned you can do a sort of a revolver, which would be essentially a credit line you could draw against, sort of like a home equity line of credit against the house, right? But just against the business
Yeah,
asset.
against the recurring revenue. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other term loan would just be a fixed bag of cash at a fixed term or rate with a fixed amortization schedule.
Yeah, with some sort of interest only and drawdown period, and then some
Yeah.
sort of amortization.
Got it.
Usually 18 months or so in the interest drawdown, maybe 24 months on the amortization. With some variety there, a little bit of movement, but that's pretty generic there.
Mm-hmm. And is the facility a combination of both of those things, or is the facility just the access to the capital? Well,
it depends. Usually there's going to be some sort of combination.
Yeah.
Particularly with companies that are experiencing quick revenue growth, right? Because then we can say, hey, you guys are at X MRR, and we're going to give you 6 times that MRR. But look, in a year from now, you're telling us you're going to be at X times 2 MRR, and now you're going to have twice as much on your credit line to draw from, right? So it's a good way to kind of lend into the growth of the company, if you will.
Is there a pattern you see that founders and CFOs and whatnot deploy capital? So where is the debt financing being allocated to versus equity financing, or is it all the same?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, typically, we see the debt used for things that come up, acquisitions, right? Or, some sort of strategic move that needs to be made. We often see people extending runway with the debt, right? So, hey, if we draw down, X dollars on this, we can go another 6 months and we can reach that milestone that's going to create a greater valuation for us at our next fundraise. Those are a couple of the things that we see most likely right now, quite honestly. And this may change as the world changes, a little bit here, but most of our clients right now don't draw down on the facilities at this point, right? Because the market's so flush with equity. The best time to get the debt is when you don't need the debt. That's when you got all the equity, right? But we don't, some firms out there will charge you or force you to draw some down or charge you because they're ultimately making money on, the interest of that they're making off the loan. What's interesting about our bank and the diversity that we have and the uniqueness of it is the venture banking group. We act almost as a deposit gatherer, right? Because, when we bring over these clients, they're coming with good chunks of equity that they're going to put in the bank. And that's dollars in the bank that we can then lend out through our asset-based lending group or our real estate group or whatever the case is. So we don't have to be dependent on, our borrowers drawing down the line to meet the goals that we have from a financial perspective. Now, will that change as the market tightens up? And, I don't know. We'll have to see.
How much of the debt is fixed versus variable rate?
It's all variable pretty much at this
Oh,
point.
variable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
So risk-free rate is that's going to be
But there's
going
usually
up.
a ceiling. There's
Yeah.
usually a floor and a ceiling too.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you seeing underwriting guidelines get a little tighter?
Yeah, yeah. I think, that's one of the things you mentioned earlier, kind of, the old school bank buying the new school bank sort of thing, right? And there was definitely, I think, some growing pains in getting to know you. But I think what we're learning, is what are the deals that are good deals for our bank and what we're looking for, and the types of businesses that we want to work with. And that kind of keeps us focused on that. But it has been, we go to our credit committee with all of our deals, and it's knowing kind of the business, understanding the business, spending time with the entrepreneurs and the investors, so that
Hmm.
we can present the strengths of the business and mitigate the risks of the business in a sense where we can put a structure together that we get comfortable with, that we feel can last the test of time, at least the time until they raise another equity round.
Yeah, I love that. So what is the ideal client profile? And then what is the process from kind of start to finish to get from application, first introduction
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah,
in the
sure.
facility drawn on?
Yeah, I mean, the ideal client is a company that's raised equity from institutional investors. They have revenue growth, they have an experienced team, they're in a marketplace that's growing, and there's a big opportunity. And we value very much the introduction, right? Because when our partners introduce us to somebody, that adds another layer uh, that's another good green check for the company, right? Because we trust our folks that bring us deals, right? So those are important things. Those are important things, right? If you got all of those things, then we'll probably lend to you. If you're missing one or two, then we're going to need to work kind of through things, right? But
Mm.
ultimately, the process begins with a phone call and getting to know everybody, and understanding a little bit more about the company and the team and what they're looking for. And then can we work within the parameters of that they're looking for. Typically then we go into a due diligence period that takes us a couple weeks or so to kind of break through. And typically the companies have all the due diligence together that we need
Yep.
because they've just raised an equity round, so we're pretty much using the same stuff. So we do what we need to do underwriting that with our spreads. And then we come back with indicative terms, and we say, this is what we're thinking, how's that work? And they might say, well, can you do this? And we say, well, what do you think about this? Can we give up here, maybe get a little something here? And then we go to our credit committee and we get an approval. Sometimes it's a conditional approval, and then we go back to the company and we talk over what we're able to do. Then we go back to our committee, we get a term sheet issued, and then our client goes and signs the term sheet. Is our goal that we get at the end there. But the whole process, really it's a 4 to 6 week process, because everybody's got to do everything, and people get busy, and things go. But 4 weeks is really moving through.
Yep.
6 weeks, and typically by 6 to 8 weeks we're funding.
Well, you guys are faster than Bank of America. I have a home equity line of credit I'm doing with them. They're the only one of the only banks that are doing HELOCs now for,
Really?
for consumers. Yeah, and it's like a 3-4 month process. They're so
Wow.
backed
There's no reason for
up. I should go talk to you guys.
that. Yeah, we don't
Um,
do HELOCs.
I know. I was teasing. Well, that makes sense. So 4 to 6 weeks, front to back. That's probably a pretty standard process with the rest of the folks in the
Yeah, it
market.
is pretty much. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
What's different about you guys than and what's sort of special and unique about working with Pacific West besides getting the wonderful pleasure of working with you, Mark?
Well, that's key. That's first and foremost right there, of course. But at Pacific Western, I mean, we're really we're a relationship focused bank, and we're a community bank at our heart, right? And what's a community bank? A community bank is that bank on Main Street that you come in and the cookies are warm and the coffee's being served. But it's that focus on relationship. I think that is something that we put first and foremost. We're also looking for quality deals and not necessarily quantity deals. We're not going to do every deal, but we want to find ones that work within our parameters and that have people that appreciate that touch. And there's the deal, and there's getting that done, and then there's, okay, now you're moving over to Pacific Western Bank and you're becoming a client of the bank, and what does that look like beyond what the terms of the loan are
Sure.
and all that. And that's where we really place a lot of focus on those relationships, right? And our internal people you know don't have to cover the number of clients that our competitors do, right? You're
Hmm.
talking about Bank of America, taking 3 months. Well, how many HELOCs are they doing right now, particularly if they're the only ones in the market, and how many people they have working on them, right? And it's a function of those things. And I know that our competitors have service models that are different than ours, that are focused on 800 numbers and self-service on the web, and we have the self-service, and our digital banking platform is extremely strong, but we also have that phone number that you can call up and say, hey,
Yeah.
you know, what's going on here? And it's not just an 800 number, it's the phone number of your portfolio manager, it's the phone number of me, it's the phone number of your loan underwriters, right? So it's people that can pick up the phone and respond. And I think that's really where in today's day it's a little bit different. But I think that's where we look to separate ourselves. And then really in terms of doing the loans, as I said earlier, it's that flexibility and the desire to try to fit the goals of the company as much as possible, and the willingness to kind of work with them through the process to do that, other than saying, okay, you're a Series A company with this, boom, this is the loan package there, bang, right? So we're customizing stuff as we go.
Yeah, probably I would make a sort of an assumption or a leap that the CEO, founder, executives that are working with you guys on these debt facilities, they're you know well to do, and there's other banking needs that they have. So if they're doing other investments, other projects, even I could even think you guys are pretty have a pretty good real estate business. There's probably that kind of relationship that is probably unique that Pacific Western Bank has to offer, right? In that context.
Yeah, I think definitely from the business side of things too, right? And we don't do any personal banking, right? And so, we're focused on, managing and investing our resources in the business, and you know, the founders and the executives and the other clients of the business can bank where they bank, but ultimately, we're focused on that business side of things. And we have an asset management group that's internal that does a lot for our clients as far as protecting their capital and getting a little bit of a return on it. But again, that's a smaller group that you can have access to. You can have access to the people. So uh,
Mhm.
I think in a nutshell, that's how I'd characterize our how we're different.
Yeah, great. Well, that's a fabulous overview.
But we
Yeah,
also like to think of ourselves, Kurt, as the fun bankers, man. We're the fun bankers. We
yeah,
like to go
well,
out and have fun, right? Like, go surfing and things like that.
yeah. That was great. Well, no, I really, really appreciated you guys underwriting some of the surf ranch thing that we did in November, making waves event. I met some incredible people through that, and got a bunch of great podcast interviews, and got some business out of it as well. I mean, I think at the end of the day, that's sort of a network that we're activating, and that's how business gets done, right?
Yeah, yeah. And especially as we, emerge from the pandemic, I mean, People like to do business with people that they know and they like and they trust, right? And it's hard to get from know to trust on a Zoom call, right? You need people to be there and to experience people's energies and connections and be able to look them in the eye and see a smile on their face. I mean, those simple little things, I've learned to appreciate a great deal more on this, back end of the pandemic.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're social creatures. I'm really looking forward to collaborating with you, Mark, on in May for the event we're going to do with Brian Garrett from Crosscut at his new pad in Pacific Palisades. That'll be good. So anybody in the audience that is interested, we're going to be doing an invite only salon, about 40 folks, and be pretty nice evening. So more of those to come. Well, I think that's a great segue into humanizing success, which is one of the core themes of the show. And I've shared even at the beginning of the show some of the challenges with my hearing. Similar to you, my parents broke up when I was in middle school. That was really, really tough. I had a lot of anger out of that as well. So I could identify and relate with you there. And ended up helping my dad get sober from a pretty nasty drug and alcohol addiction when I
It's an
was in.
amazing podcast. I listened to that one, and that story is so powerful, man.
Yeah, well, I mean, we all have things that we battle with. I mean, this is part of the being alive. It's a challenging world, and feels like we've moved into the season where there's more volatility. There's more challenges on the horizon from stuff we're dealing with war in Europe, and we have climate change, and we all sort of have to work together to sort of make it work. And I think part of that is just being honest about stuff. And so having said that, I do, in the spirit of coaching too, I do believe that the bigger the breakdown, the bigger the possibility for a breakthrough.
Yes, definitely.
And I so having said all that, what is there a challenge personally or professionally that you've faced and overcome that you're comfortable sharing? And how'd you get over the hurdle, and what gifts did the pain give you? I mean, you've already were really honest about, your mom coming out. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe it's something else, but whatever you're comfortable sharing, of course. Yeah.
Well, I love this part of your podcast, and I think it for me, it really is about that anger, and you know it kept me from a lot. It kept me very egocentric. It kept me very focused on my needs and what I wanted. And the anger that I would experience when I didn't get those things. And I think that for me, the success is in the relationship that I have with my sons. And both of them are great guys that I love dearly. And, I tell them constantly, I love you. And I hug them and I kiss them. And,
Yeah.
and I let them know. And my dad didn't grow up around that. And that wasn't the way he was. And, if my sons, move into their young adult years and beyond and don't struggle with this, kind of addiction to anger almost kind of thing, then I think that's the success, right? And um, seeing them so far, I'm pretty optimistic about what's going on. But I think for me, that's where I see the greatest success. And I think part of that again was the willingness to learn and the willingness to change and the willingness to shine a light down where the darkness is, and be willing to kind of recognize that and go through that, and in the same breath, kind of accept it and also let it go at the same time. And so I think that's where I would focus my time. My my mother and I had ended up having a great relationship. And she, she taught me something very valuable, and that was, you got to be who you are. And my mom would always say to me after I talked to her on the phone, she'd say to me, "You be you." And so I'd say, "Hey, all right, mom, see you later, love you." She goes, "You be you."
I love that.
But it used to piss me off, man.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. My mom, her thing she'd say to me is "think good thoughts," and I'd be, yeah, 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 think good.
Right? I'm like, why aren't you saying you love me? Right? It's like, you be you. Who else am I going to be, mom? Come on, Jesus.
Yeah, yeah,
You know?
totally.
But as I've grown and as I've learned a bit more myself, I found out that that's the greatest thing she ever taught me is you be you. And so um, I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. I'm good to keep going for a few minutes, but I want to be
Yeah,
sensitive to you. You good?
yeah.
All right, Levi, we're gonna edit that little bit out. Mark, what's your mom's name?
Sharon Barker.
All right, she's still around.
She is not. She passed. I think it was just about 7 years ago. I think it was.
Yeah. All right. Well, sorry to hear that, but I'm really glad that you were able to share that story. And Sharon sounds awesome.
Yeah, yeah. My mom was a character. We put on her gravestone Maverick, and, and that is what she was. She was a maverick.
Well, it sounds like you are too. And I think one of the other things that I wanted to dig into that we got into that I think is another gift I'm hearing is the soul centered selling.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it sounds really to me like one of the insights you got from kind of your challenge around overcoming anger was that you've been able to model the behavior for your kids, which is incredible. That feels a lot like what my dad's been able to do for me, and that's growing up. And I think in that same breath, talk to us about soul centered selling and what is it, and what can we take away from that and how can we benefit from it?
yeah, yeah. I mean, soul-centered selling came from a reinvention of how I was as a salesperson. And as I mentioned before, this anger and the ego that was associated with it was very prevalent with me as a young man. And once I kind of figured out how to sell, I became enamored with closing. And this was in the early 90s. And the Glenn Ross idea, always be closing, this idea that I could manipulate and influence and get people to do something that they wouldn't do, and that otherwise, and I could benefit from it and I'd get paid. There was something weirdly attractive to me in that. And I became really good at it. The Columbo close, the one where you're walking out and you're like, they say no, and you're walking out and you turn around and you go, one more thing. Yeah. And like that was, or, there was the takeaway close. So, well, no, I'm not gonna be able to do that, like, and there was all these closes, and we'd sit around and go, yeah, I used that close there. And it was like this, thing about me, right? Like what I could do to get what I wanted, and whatever was happening to this other person.
Yeah, it's a zero sum. It's a win
Yeah,
lose dynamic.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And I was married. We got married and went to Puerto Vallarta for our honeymoon, and we're driving over to the hotel, and the cab driver says, hey, if you go to this event tomorrow and go through this presentation, you'll get $100 and a free bottle of tequila. And I looked at my wife and I was like, $100 and free bottle of tequila and free breakfast. I mean, we got to go. She's like, it's one of those things. And I'm like,
Timeshare sales.
it's
Yeah.
timeshare. And I'm like, we'll just go get the free tequila and the lunch, and we'll be good. It'll be a fun day. So we go over there and we get our tours, and we get our little lunch, and then they literally bring us into this room that has no windows, right? And we're after we've been in this, seeing all the ocean and all this
Mm.
beautiful stuff and everything, and now they bring us in this like room with no windows with the fluorescent lights. It's like almost like we're getting interrogated as criminals by the cops. And they sat there and pitched and closed and closed and closed, and Lord have mercy, I flew down my brand new credit card and I swiped it and I bought a timeshare. And I was like, "Oh yeah, we'll use it. We'll use it." And I'm walking out with my wife. They're like, "Oh yeah, great. We'll see them." Yeah, honey. Well, that was, we'll use it. And I just didn't feel good. And I went back to the pool and I'm sitting there and I'm trying a little bit of the tequila, which wasn't even that good tequila actually. And somewhere through this little mini tequila buzz I was putting on, I was like, I had this epiphany and I was like, wait a second. I feel like shit. I feel terrible. I feel like I've been violated. I feel like, someone put something over me. I feel embarrassed. And I was like, wow, is this what people feel like when I leave the room? Like after I'm rocking out, like, hey, I closed them. Yeah, like is this what I'm sowing in the world? Right. Like it was like, whoa, this doesn't feel good. And it totally changed how I sold because I went back and I tried to sell the same way and I just couldn't, man. I just was like, I couldn't do it. And I figured I got to figure something else out. And, I kind of went back to my teaching days and I said, what made me a good teacher? And what made me a good teacher was I asked good questions. I listened, as we said earlier, to the answers, asked follow ups, listened to understand. And I told some good stories along the way to keep everybody interested and to illustrate some points. And I said, well, maybe I can do this in selling. So I just started going and I started asking a lot of questions. And I started just kind of letting people talk and getting to know people and taking people out to lunch and just kind of getting to know these people and being interested in who they are as opposed to just the fact that they represent a purchase order for me, right? And so I suddenly started having fun. I was doing even better than I had been before, and people actually like seemed like they wanted to see me as opposed to like they had to see me before, right? And so, through this process, I started thinking about it, and I came up with this concept of soul centered selling, and it's really it's centered in intention, right? And intention is so powerful. And in my old world, my intention was to close, to sell. That's what I'm going to sell you. I'm going to close you. And that was my intention. And that led to behaviors that were aligned with that intention. The Columbo close, this thing, whatever, blah, blah, blah. You know, what shifted was that intention to serve, and that intention that I'm going to serve people, that I'm going to come from a place of servant leadership, of servant sales, and ask questions and help people get what they want, because if I help them get what they want, then probably I'm going to get what I want in the long run as well.
Yeah, win-win,
Yeah,
positive game.
win-win, exactly. And so I came up with this concept, what I'd been doing. I work in acronyms, man. I make a lot of acronyms in my life, and SOUL was an important one. Soul centered selling, and the S stands for be a student of the story, right? And we're all telling a story, whether we realize it or not. Your prospect is telling you a story. You're telling them one. My whole thing is let's be conscious of it. Let's be aware of the stories that we're telling. Let's be receptive and open to the story that we're being told and not feel like we have to force our story. So be a student of the story, understand the story. Always observe and orient, right? So now that I know what I know, now that I've not only listened to you, but I've observed, your body movements or what's in your between the words that you're saying, wherever the case is. Now that we know what we know, where do we go, right? Is this somebody that I can help? Or is this somebody that I can introduce to maybe somebody else who can help them, right? So that's that qualification stage, which to me now is the most important part of the sales process. I used to think closing was, but qualifying. Is this somebody I can help? Right? I mean, let's find out soon. So either I can help you or we can all move on and go to the next one. You is understanding, and that's really that idea of understanding what's at stake for your buyer, because people buy for a variety of reasons, but they tend to be emotional reasons. And they tend to buy, some buy out of fear, some buy out of a desire for some sort of acceptance, some buy out of whatever that emotional thing might be. But what people tell you typically is they'll tell you they have a problem, and you listen to that problem, and that problem tends to create a level below that, which is some sort of problem in the business. And that problem then in the business is creating some sort of problem or issue in that person's world, right? And if you can get down to that third level of understanding, you're really, you're serving the person. You're understanding kind of what's at stake and what really they need. And L is the concept of leadership. And in my old days, I used to push people, and now it's more of, hey, this is what do I understand your problem. This is what the world can look like. Follow me, and let's go to that world together, and we'll all feel a lot better. So it's that idea of sales as being leaders. I mean, to me, great salespeople have always been leaders, right? And great leaders have always been really good salespeople as well. And that's that idea of sales too. I mean, I'm going to do a little tangent, but people think the word sales is kind of a dirty word sometimes.
Yeah, it's a four-letter word, sleazy bird.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and sales is just, is service. It's helping people. It's getting out there and helping to solve problems. And as I look at it like that, that's you know, one of the most powerful and positive things that I can do in the world is help people solve their problems.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a real slippery slope because good salespeople can be very, very persuasive, and it's a very powerful combination of skills, and with that power you can do lots of good, but equally with lots of damage. Similar with anything, I guess. Same with money. Same with lots of these mechanisms are like that.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
really appreciate the intention, and it's a really catchy acronym. So soul.
yep,
So being a student of the story, that's the S. The O
yep,
is observe and orient, right?
yep,
U is the understanding, and that's sort of the
yep.
insight that you get. And
Hmm.
then the L is the leadership, and that's sort of a pull motion versus a push, or an
Yeah,
attract
or a
versus a
follow.
promote.
That's leadership is where the action happens, right? That's where
Yeah,
the action happens.
yeah. That's
That's where
something
the
I've had to
decisions
really
are
work on is to be um, not there's a to not have to force the outcome, but just let things flow. And I do
made.
this
Mhm.
setup that you're describing is it's a real very similar to what I try to do, but I still have a lot of work to do, no doubt. I
We all
love
do.
that. I love the idea of being a student of the story, though, and being, because I think what that does is it grounds you in reality, and it sets up the state to be able to truly observe the environment. Because I think the problem that a lot of us get into, and I know especially like with like investing, or if in team building or going after something, is I failed when the game that I'm playing is different than the game that's actually being played, right? And I think
Yes.
that's really what your method helped to get clear and get grounded in really what game is really going on.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, Kurt. It really
Yeah.
is. And if you're playing a different game than your prospects playing, it's not going to end well, is it? I mean, you guys got to be playing the same game.
Yeah. Well, that's a great segue. Let's do a couple rapid fire questions, and then we'll wrap up.
Cool.
Best boss or partner you ever had? Who was it and why?
Pete Biasini. Pete Biasini was my first sales boss. He's the one who taught me to work hard in sales, but he also taught me that you have to ask for the order. And that doesn't necessarily mean closing. That can be leadership as well. But, that was one of the things that Pete taught me. And Pete taught me also how to really care for people. And as a leader, he started off in this company that I was at called RS Hughes. It's a 3M distributor, industrial supplies. He started off as a sales guy and ended up being the president and CEO of the company. And it was because of how he treated people, and he always made you feel so good, man. Like when you were hanging with Pete, you felt great, and
Oh, I love that. That's a great
yeah,
insight. Well,
yeah.
that's a good segue. So, best team or company culture you've ever been a part of
Um,
so far? Seems like you're trying to do a great job at what you're doing at
Yeah,
President.
no, definitely. I mean, Pac West is definitely there, but my greatest teams ever, I think of my lacrosse teams when I think of those, and I think of, the impact I've had with some kids, and I think of, middle school lacrosse team I had at the Landon School in the mid '80s. That was a great team. I had a team down in La Jolla when I was coaching at La Jolla High School. We called them the Dogs because our saying was the Shakespeare phrase, "Cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war." And then I think about a team I had recently at Sequoia High School where, it's just when those sports teams kind of come together and gel, and you have that intensity of that competition together, and you go through these very physical but also emotional challenges together. It's pretty cool how that stuff can build. So, but I definitely give a shout out to JT at TriNet as well, because he created a great team culture there as well.
Yeah, who's JT?
John Turner, who is he was the head of sales at TriNet when we went up for the
Great.
IPO.
Well,
Yeah.
we'll have to track him down and send him this. John, you're the man. Um, if you could have magically any band play any venue, future, past, or now, present, who would it be and where?
Um, it would be the Rolling Stones.